This is the Ohio Building Code Administration chapter, and Jay Richards will be starting us off. Recording has started.
Thank you, Megan. Welcome back, everybody. Hopefully everybody got a nice little respite from section after section, slide after slide of chapter 1. We will start with 106, and we will work through the end of chapter 1 through this next hour and a half. So 106.1, this section is all about construction documents, and this is about information to help owners know what needs to be provided to building departments to help them.
Into the catacombs.
We need to mute. Thank you. What people need to submit to the building department, and we're going to start right off in section 106.1.1. And this has a whole list of drawing and pages of information that should be included in the construction documents. Construction documents can be made up of drawings, they can be made up of specifications. So in other words, some things can be graphically expressed, some things are written, and there is a certain amount of owner choice in how they're doing it, but what the plans examiners have to determine is whether the information they have presented in these in this set of construction documents is sufficient to determine compliance with the building code. I know when I was in professional practice, we had project manuals that obviously had drawings and specifications, and in combination, they made the construction documents that expressed all that information. So these are the various types of drawings that and information that can be present, and you'll find under each one of those items there's some descriptions of the kinds of information that is relevant to code compliance. It's a helpful tool when communicating back and forth between the code official and the design professional. Fire protection systems. This is one of those that is a good example of a conditional approval. A lot of times the fire protection systems are drawn by a certified fire protection designer, and it's going to come later on in the process. It's planned for, it's designed for. The original construction documents may not have all the information, but it will be a submittal that's coming later. And oftentimes that's a good use for a conditional approval because there's not necessarily a whole lot of objections, but it is a condition that doesn't allow the building official to issue a full approval. And some of that is addressed in 106.1.1. Special inspections comes in at 106.1.1.2, and basically what needs to be provided by the submitter is that list of special inspections that are going to be provided out of Chapter 17. And those are going to be inspections that the owner is contracting for with a recognized third party. Could be the registered design professional themselves, or it could be another entity that specializes in the particular testing. But they're going to do either periodic or constant testing of certain conditions, and all that's listed in Chapter 17, but it needs to be spelled out in the construction documents what things are going to be covered by the owner, and the building department needs to audit that process. We have a BBS memo out about inspections in general and special inspections more specifically. There are some special provisions required under 106.1.2. So if you have certain things going on relative to the building, some additional information needs to be provided. The first one in this list, we have 7 items identified here. The first one in the list is industrialized units. The owner has a responsibility to identify that they are making use of an industrialized unit in the construction of the building when they're communicating to the local AHJ, the local building official. That is helping the two AHJs work together. Uh, if there is a public swimming pool involved, the Ohio Department of Health has some approval relative to licensing of that.
Jay, you went on mute.
No, I apologize for that. I don't know why. Everything says I should be. It just happened. Okay. Anyway, uh, licensed fireworks, state fire marshal has preliminary approval of that. Elevation certification and dry flood proofing certifications. Those are for buildings that are proposed in a flood hazard area, and that involves the local floodplain administrator. If the project has anything to do with detention, so jails, prisons, and lockups, regulated by the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections, they have some preliminary approvals that needs to be evidenced in the submission. When it comes to hazardous materials relative to, and there's kind of two paths here. One of them is if there's hazardous materials associated with building services, the building official has approval authority, and the fire official needs to be notified because they have consequences downstream. If it's hazardous material not associated with building of services, then the fire has approval as a stored material, notification to the building official. It's going to impact um, some requirements in Chapter 4 primarily. And then the last point we want to make is adjacent property, that if a parcel adjacent to the property where the building is located has been dedicated or deeded for purposes of maintaining a fire separation distance, that's where you'll find this provision now. It's under 106.1.2. This is moved from another place in the previous edition for those of you who have been around a while. So construction documents have to have evidence of responsibility. So we need to know who prepared those documents, who was primarily responsible. And if it was a registered design professional, they're required to put a seal on it in accordance with their licensing rules. One thing you'll find is that most buildings under the Ohio Building Code require the involvement of a registered design professional, so you should expect to see a seal. We do not do seal enforcement through the building department. That's through the local board. That's through the board that licenses those folks. We do specifically identify those places where a seal is not required. Most notably, they're going to be related to residential buildings, so 1, 2, and 3 family dwellings, energy calculations for those dwellings, fire protection systems if they're done by a fire protection system designer. If there is replacement of systems, equipment, and devices, this is probably in a more colloquial vernacular, I'm replacing a like for like. It's more attuned to maintenance of an existing building services than anything else. So the idea is that the engineering has already been done, and so they're just maintaining their building under its current approval. And then alterations, and new construction and repairs not affecting health or safety as it relates to a means of egress, the structural system, the mechanical system, the electrical system, plumbing system, and the fire protection system. So primarily what this leaves is finishes, casework, um, again, maintenance items where you're upgrading an existing thing, but it's already been there. So it's really geared more towards the maintenance of the issue. We do allow for amended construction documents, and in some cases, we require amended construction documents. So if the owner through this process has changed their mind, let's say they've been issued a certificate of plan approval or a CPA, and they've changed their mind, and what they want to do is something a little bit different, and we would look at it and say, is that a substantive change? Does it impact how the applicable provisions of the building code, or how those applicable provisions are impact that building based on that change? Um, so if it is substantive, then those changes need to be submitted to the building official and they need to get approved prior to those changes being executed. Um, and of course, the when we start dealing with things like emergency repairs, um, it all falls under that. You can get the repair done and then come back as a follow-up with the building official, with the building department, and get the approval after the fact. We also don't limit people in terms of the materials and methods of construction, equipment, and devices that can be used. We just want to make sure that they are safe or they meet a certain performance requirement. So um, in the uh, basic chapters of the OBC, you have what we refer to as the technical sections of the OBC. They're identifying listed standards for particular materials or particular devices or particular assemblies, or a particular standard for the performance of that, for example, in its flame spread or smoke developed in accordance with ASTM E84. Um, those are prescriptive requirements, and they set that bar, that minimum bar. Um, but it doesn't mean that that's it. That's the end of the story. So 106.4 starts into the process of allowing alternative materials and methods, and it references you to go to 114. There's a process in 114 that Rob will talk about. But up there, you'll find that there's basically two sections, 114.3.1, which talks about materials, products, and assemblies, methods of construction that are prescribed in the code, which is what I've explained. And then there's also a section for those that are not prescribed in the code. But there are processes out there for recognized testing labs and product certification bodies and things like that to go in and test these alternative materials and methods of construction against those known standards to essentially arrive at an evaluation service report that gets you to an equivalence in the performance of that alternative material. So it would start here as allowing it, move through 114 to actually get them approved. We also have alternative engineered design, which this is looking to the registered design professional representing the owner and going through a design and documenting that design, that it has been tested or can demonstrate the testing would be at an equivalent level to the quality, strength, effectiveness, fire resistance, durability, and safety of those minimum requirements that are established prescriptively in the building code. So under 106.5 alternative engineered design, they have to have this design criteria to show that equivalent level as applicable to the product or the system that is being proposed. They do have to assert in the submittal that they are providing an alternative engineered design or an AED. And that's one of the things that gets recorded in the application for plan approval as well as on the certificate of occupancy, because this is a unique approach to getting an approval. They need to provide the technical data and have sufficient information there in that technical data to substantiate the AED. And this is where communication between the plans examiner, the building official, and the probably owner's representative as the registered design professional need to work through this to make sure that they have enough of that technical data to substantiate it. A new thing that we've put in here, 106.5.4, is about the opportunity to look at newer model codes and standards. So as you know, we're in the 24 Ohio Building Code. It's based on the 2021 International Building Code. They already have the 2024 International Building Code published, and we're starting into the code cycle for the 2027 International Building Code. There is always that growth and adaptation, and what this provision allows is some due consideration for considering the application of future editions of the building code when it comes to compliance for a building that's submitted today under the 2024 Ohio Building Code. It doesn't mean automatically, it just, you kind of need to work through this. Is there enough technical data to substantiate it and recognize that the model codes work as a whole, and that if it may be very difficult, if not impossible, to take piecemeal parts of a future edition without looking at the entirety of that model code. So that's 106, construction documents. 107 is the plan approval process. Again, this is the continuation, and we get the authority out of the revised code section 379104. As a reminder that before beginning construction, that documents must be prepared, and those documents show conformance with the codes based on the design that's presented, and it's submitted to the building department having jurisdiction, and that ultimately it has to be approved by the building official before the owner can start construction. So before beginning construction, this stuff needs to happen and it needs to get approved by the building official. If that doesn't happen and you find somebody who's started construction without getting an approval, they have work without approval, and your building department should have a process to address that. 107.2, application for plan approval. It all starts with that applications, and it starts with the owner. So the owner, the owner's representative has to submit construction documents with an application requesting plan approval from the building department. That application has to have specific information or ask for specific information so that you get that information. They need to describe the work proposed. They need to tell you where it is. They need to tell you what the use and occupancy proposed is. The construction documents and other information needs to be submitted. I mentioned specifications as one of those things. You could have manufacturer's installation instructions. You could need to have evaluation service reports as examples of other information. It needs to be signed by the owner or the owner's representative, and that they do have to declare some things like whether they're making use of an industrialized unit, are they using listed and labeled products, or are they using alternative engineered design. And this starts the building department's code review and that 30-day clock. Remember, this is the application, and the date on that application starts that 30-day clock. This is a sample example of a application for plan approval relative to a non-residential building. Again, you can find a copy of this in the Board of Building Standards resource packet. We have a link to that on the board's website. and I believe it's under building department tools, and it's a tile. You can click on it and it'll open up the whole packet. There's a number of different useful uh, forms and samples of things in there. 107.2.1 time limitation of the application. Again, I mentioned this just a moment ago. 3701 379104 and OBC 107.2.1 both reference the 30-day limit for the plan review to get, and that starts with that application date. There's also in this section a paragraph that talks about the invalidation of the application. This is different than invalidation of the approval. This is invalidation of the application. And essentially it can be there for 6 months and it becomes invalid if the jurisdiction has completed their review and they've issued an order saying this stuff is non-compliant, and there's been no action exercised by the owner to pursue an appeal, and there's been no response by the owner to that they're either going to revise and resubmit, or they have revised and resubmitted corrected documents in response to the order. So basically, you've done your job, nothing has happened on the owner's side, and 6 months have passed, that application becomes invalid. Once again, this is a reason why the building departments need to have a process to track and audit where projects are in their jurisdiction. The review of the plans. So this is one where the building official causes the documents to be examined. It's possible they hold a master plans examination or one of the plans examination certifications, so they could do some of it, but most departments, they have plans examiners uh, that are going to do it. The building official causes that plans examination. You can do it either through a master plans examination or some combination of elective plans examiners, and that the building official still has a responsibility to ensure they're coordinated, all those reviews, particularly if you have a group of elective plans examiners. The other aspect here would be that if you have a fire department that is wanting to participate in plan review, you need to make sure that they're in the loop and reminding them that they too have to do this within your 30-day window. So if the documents are inadequate, 107.4.1 talks about that. Basically, the plans examination completes the review to the extent possible. They report their findings and in particular, the missing information. And section 106 is really good for identifying what sections or information are missing. And that information needs to get reported to the building official. And then 107.4.2 talks about resubmitting of plans. So in response to either an order to revise and resubmit, or in response to a correction letter, revise and resubmit, the owner has that responsibility to do that, to move forward from a denied approval to full approval. 107.4, the review of the plans. So we already talked about the documents sealed by a design professional. There's some more information here in 107.4.3 that basically talks about if it is sealed by a design professional, that when you do the plans examination, you only need to examine it to determine conformity with requirements other than those things involved in the technical analysis. Fire protection system documents 107.4.4. It can be submitted either by a certified fire protection designer or a registered design professional. Participation by the fire official. I touched on this earlier in the coordination piece, but the building official does have a responsibility on an annual basis to reach out to the fire officials in their jurisdiction and say, do you want to participate in the plan review process? They should get some response from this, from the fire officials, so that they know who needs to get documents. And then the fire official must provide their comments within the time frame. That time frame doesn't change just because a fire official has requested to participate in plan review. The building official still has their 30-day window to make their determinations. Plan review 1075. If they're in compliance, the plans examiner communicates that information to the building official. The building officials evaluates those recommendations from the plans examiner and looks at the fire department's comments, determines if the that it's conforms to the building codes, and if it does, then they'll stamp or endorse the construction documents as approved, issue a CPA, and then the copy of the CPA, the approved documents, the on-site inspection record, and a list of required inspections goes back to the owner. The owner is then responsible to post that CPA in a conspicuous public location, and it needs to remain there until all the final inspections are completed. This again is a sample of a certificate of plan approval. You can find a copy of this in the resource pack for commercial building departments. Items of non-compliance. So if something is found to be non-compliant through that examination, that plans examiner reports it to the building official. The building official needs to offer the owner their options for corrective actions. And get some response from the owner as to what they want to do. The owner has essentially two options at this point. They can revise and resubmit the drawings to show that conditions will be constructed in a compliant fashion, or that they will not be brought into compliance, primarily because the owner may wish to appeal an order, which is their right. And if that's the case, the building official is should be looking into just issuing that adjudication order so that the owner can appeal that. And of course, 107.6.2, it is the building official's responsibility based on the items of non-compliance that they need to issue an adjudication order in response to the owner's request or the plan examiner's recommendation, and that they will move into section 109 for the issuance of any orders, and possibly they could issue some approvals per 105. Remember, we have conditional approvals, we have phased approvals. Those are two types of approvals that aren't a full approval. They have some aspects that are non-compliant or are having a disagreement between interpretations, and they need to get resolved before a full approval can be issued. But you potentially, it would not be uncommon to see an adjudication order and a phased approval issued at the same time for the same project. And then 1077, so once the construction document sets are approved, the building department keeps a set, and the other set or sets are returned to the applicant, and they must keep at least one set at the project site for reference by the inspectors, and they need to include any manufacturer's installation instructions that are required as part of that, because there'll be information in there that might impact the inspectors' work in the field as they look at that work. And that's 107, the plan approval process. Moving on to Rob, 108, in inspections.
Okay. Thank you, Jay. Perfect segue into inspections. Let's see here. There we go. So, does everybody see the
Yes,
presentation?
I do.
Okay, it's not coming up on my side over here for some reason. Okay, so section 108 deals with the inspection process. Again, remember, this whole thing is a process, and though you're administrating it, the owner is following it too, and they're designers and or constructors. So in this section, I'm going to deal specifically, but not exhaustively, with respect to the items related to doing the inspections. So there's basically three main entities in this process. The first one obviously is the owner or the authorized representative, which in this case most likely would be a site superintendent or somebody to that effect. The building official and the building inspector. So the owner is required, excuse me, to notify the building department when the work is ready. So again, this is normally being done with probably without the owner's knowledge. It's occurring with the contractor and their notification to you, the building department. And they are also responsible to provide on-site access for inspection to be performed. In other words, they can't say that something's done and then set a bunch of things in front of the wall that needs to be inspected for electrical, plumbing, framing. And if the inspector can't get to that, the inspectors can't get to that, and the inspection can't be completed. So the building owner and the contractor have that responsibility to provide access. Building official is to provide the owner with a list of required inspections, which that comes when the approval is issued. The building official also is to cause, unless he's also or he or she is also a building inspector, cause timely inspections to be made within 4 days. Now that's the time that they call. So the time that they call, that's the registry of when the 4-day clock starts. And it's 4 working days. And our rules indicate that failure to inspect in 4 days allows work to continue by the contractor to the next required inspection. Now, with the number of phases of the work, that may not be that big of a deal. But if you are finishing a wall and you do have all the systems in it and the inspections have not been completed, technically, the contractor can start hanging drywall and cover it all up. And what that means, though, is that you cannot tell them to take it down to inspect it, because it's a failure on the building department's fault for not having fulfilled the request within the time limitation. So the building inspector has to request and obtain right of entry. For new build sites, oftentimes that's not necessary, in that the inspector can walk onto the site, can walk to the job trailer, can check in with someone, and maybe have a short conversation and head off to do the inspections. It's a lot different when you have a single family residence or any other type of kind of closed access into a building. So the inspector has to ensure that they have actually asked the occupant, it doesn't say the owner, it says the occupant, if they can come in to do the inspection. And then the inspector has to hear the occupant say in the affirmative, yes, you may come in, or some other way that they would say that. So that there's a difference then at that line between legal entry versus trespassing. So we want to make sure that that protocol is very carefully followed. And then the building inspector, of course, verifies that the construction matches the approved construction documents. We've said that probably at least 5 or 6 times so far in this presentation. So now let's talk about briefly about the list of required inspections. And this is actually based on the project scope. So one of the hesitancies I have with departments, and it's not wrong, it's just that there has to be some care taken in the use of it, is a boilerplate list of inspections. If anyone at that point up to the approval knows and understands the design and the documentation, it would be one person. That would be your plans examiner. They review the design, they know what it's about, and they most likely understand the scoping of the project. Now, it's not required to task them to do the required list of inspections, but it makes things awfully efficient if you do let the plan examiner do that list. And it can be just something that's computerized and a system of check marks, and everything that's been checked is stuff that stays on the list. Everything else drops off through the computer programming. If it's a written list or a boilerplate list, the recommendation is that anything that doesn't apply to the project should be completely struck out, so that the owner knows that they do not need to call for that inspection. So let's look at some of these type of inspections in that section. Not exhaustive, but basically these are the key points within construction where it's necessary to do the inspections that are called for, because the next inspection is going to be things that'll be done that's actually covering up the work that was previously inspected. So for instance, lot line markers, which is all site work, important to have that, because if you want to put the footing and foundation in the right place, and then it's not in the wrong place, as we had received a call recently about that. The lot line markers need to be verified, need to check for right-of-ways or any easements, things of that nature. So the inspector really does need to look at the site plan and walk the job, and if necessary, drop a line on it, or have someone, one of the contractors, pull out a transit, make a determination that everything is where it is at grade, things of that nature. Footing and foundation, most of you probably completely understand that, have seen that done. I don't think there's really much more explanation needs to be done other than that has to be the right depth. Need to have all the right pieces in place before you pour the concrete. And then the concrete is checked. Concrete slab and underfloor, that one is a little bit more of a coordination issue. You want to make sure that if there are underground utilities, any type of systems that are building service equipment, that all those things are properly located in the slab, where the slab will be. And that all the necessary pieces are put in, rebar, any vapor barriers, things of that nature. Lowest floor elevation, of course, is mainly geared towards buildings that are built either close to or in a floodplain. And it has to be established by Chapter 16, 1612, I believe. The next one is framing. That one's pretty self-explanatory. Lath and gypsum, which is going on the framing afterwards. Fire-resistant penetrations. Definitely important if you're working in a building that has a lot of compartmentalization. Energy efficiency, building service equipment. And by the way, notice that even though that's in the end of the list, a lot of those inspections are going to be done up near the framing, depending on the type of wall. And then any other inspection that's instituted by the building official. So under 108, I think it's 212, the building official can authorize additional inspections based on scope of work. So even though they're not listed in this list, they can add additional ones that are part of their routine inspections that are completed on jobs of different magnitudes of scope. Just a little aside, you probably heard me say this before, but the Residential Code of Ohio does not require a roofing inspection. So most jurisdictions, though, do require a roofing inspection. for roofs of residential structures. But the way to institute that is that the building official just has to put it into the list. It's not going to show up if it's just drawn directly out of section 108. It won't show up in that list. And then other things that other inspectors will do, such as elevator inspectors, boiler inspectors. The industrialized units are going to be inspected in factory, so most likely won't affect you guys, other than that what they send needs to work with what you guys already approved, which is going to be the foundations and any other utilities and things of that nature that will be receiving this IU. Your inspections will be, as Jay had already pointed out earlier in this session, that they're going to be checking for things in terms of the condition of the unit as it shows up, making sure it's the right one, and that there's a little bit of coordination then that the building department inspector has to do to make sure that everything marries up between units and everything works on the foundations that have been approved by the building department. And then, of course, audits of special inspections. Special inspections are done by either registered design professionals who have been approved by the building official to perform them, or it may be an independent company that is doing special inspections for a building's work. You as the inspector should, when you get onto a site and you know special inspections are being done, you should go in and take a look at what's been done recently by the special inspectors, just to see if there was anything that has been kind of a repeat violation or a repeat issue of noncompliance that that inspector has called out. If that condition happens, then you should make a note of it. The building official should already have a copy of the special inspection report, but you can tell the building official that apparently noncompliance is continuing on this matter, and that maybe the building official needs to take the next step and issue an order to require it to be fixed. So that's just something to keep in mind. Right of entry for agents, that is for building inspectors or even plans examiners and building officials if they enter the site. It applies to all of you. The building official or designee is authorized to enter the structure or premises at reasonable times. Reasonable generally means somewhere between 7 and 6. To inspect and perform the duties imposed by this code, provided that, number one, okay, these things that are coming up are things that you, the inspector, or any other agent of the building department will do when you show up to the job site. You need to present your credentials, meaning your badge or whatever you have that's going to show and identify who you are. And you need to present it to the occupant. Again, you have to request entry, and the occupant needs to give it to you. Where permission to enter is not obtained, meaning they deny or tell you that you are not allowed to enter the building, or if the building official has probable cause to believe that there exists in the structure or upon the premises a condition which could be a serious hazard, then the building official needs to take action. And he'll proceed to section 109 to issue an adjudication order. And if he still can't get in, he'll work with the law director or prosecutor in the jurisdiction to secure an administrative search warrant to gain entry into the building. So when an inspector finds completed work in accordance with the docs, he is to communicate, all right? He or she, the inspector, needs to communicate the findings to the owner. That includes things that comply and things that do not comply. So I'll show you in a moment or two what that form looks like in terms of what the code says and the form that we developed based on that language and why we say it the way we do. So the inspector needs to make a note on the inspection on-site record. He needs to communicate the findings to the building official, and the building official shall issue a certificate of occupancy. Now, this is presuming in the course of all inspections during a project that if they continue to be in compliance with the approved construction documents, the conclusion of that process is a C of O, or it could be a certificate of completion if it's for a smaller job. And all that's found in section 111. Again, remember when we started this whole discussion, we were talking about the different ways that the building codes, and especially administrating the codes, what it does in terms of buildings. So we talked about securing the approvals, which was the basis basically of code administration, and then the documentation of it and the approval of it. And we're dealing now with the assurance of completion, the assurance of code compliance. Every time an inspector goes out to the site and determines that the work matches the approved construction documents, he is providing assurance that the building is being constructed as approved, which will eventually mean a safe building to occupy. So in that inspection record, there's also a thing that we call the owner's option, okay? And it should just automatically be in your form. That way the contractor or the owner can see that, hey, I have one of three ways to respond to this notification by the inspector that I'm out of compliance, okay? So let's talk about what those are. The first one's obvious, that the owner is going to say, yeah, we will bring that item into compliance with the approved construction documents, meaning we'll fix it in the field and it will match. And when you inspect it, you'll see that it's now correct. The second option is revise the construction documents, which means resubmitting them back to the building department. And this is usually more of an as-built condition that the owner believes is okay and that they want to keep it this way. So they'll revise and resubmit the documents. Now, there is a chance that in the review of this condition, that the plans examiner and a building official agree that this is not in compliance and that they have to take it out and fix it. So then the building official addresses it to them in that way. It's a denial of an approval to an as-built condition, which means they could appeal it, okay? So, and then the third option is request a determination or an adjudication order from the building official. And this is basically where someone says, not going to fix it in the field, not going to revise it, but we think it's okay and it's not a problem. So we're just going to go ahead and go try to secure a variance from the appeals board. Again, remember, this is all about communication. You're communicating the findings of noncompliance and then documenting the decision of the owner or their representative to the building official. Okay, now observation of violations. This is something that you may or may not have ever heard of before, but this is when there's violations that aren't part of the approved documents. So I'll explain that in a second. If an inspector observes a code violation that was either shown incorrectly or not adequately addressed or detailed in the approved construction documents, then the inspector shall communicate the findings to the building official, who will make a determination of the code violation to warrant communicating it to the owner as a notice of recommended change. Our form for this looks very, very similar to the adjudication order. The only difference is we're not telling them that they're wrong. The adjudication order is citing the code violation and it's telling them that they're wrong. This happens to be a code violation, but this section basically is admitting that nobody's perfect. A designer can inadequately design something and it's not in compliance with the code. The plan examiner can review that condition and somehow miss it and say that it's approvable, and the building official can approve it. But you as the inspector, we talked earlier at the beginning how the inspector can check the code. You know, you guys are smart. You all have experience, you know what you're looking for, you understand how things go together, and you have an approved set of construction documents. So in this case, this thing was, whatever it was approved, which means it was a license to build. The owner has a right to build it that way, whether it was right or wrong. That's one of the Achilles heels in plan examination, because like I said, nobody's perfect. You can have really great plans examiners still miss things sometimes. So this is kind of a backup way of addressing those issues, okay? The notice of recommended change is just that. The building official is communicating to the owner that, hey, we missed it. Somebody else, probably your designer, missed it as well. It is not a code violation after we reviewed it, but we do recommend that you change it. Okay, so it's not an order. They don't have to do it, but the building official is saying, look, we recommend that you change it. If the owner decides not to change it, then their answer is, we're going to keep it. And the building official can't do anything about it. It's built, it's going to remain, and there's no harm done. Now, the building official still needs to document that as a condition in the certificate of occupancy under stipulations, variances, that section of that form. Okay. So if an inspector
Rob, there's a
observes,
question.
sure, go ahead.
Oh, no, Jason, just wait for it. There you go. Never mind.
Okay. All right, if the inspector observes an unsafe condition or a serious hazard, the inspector shall communicate the condition to the owner. And it's important to communicate to the owner or to the occupants in the building, because if this is a safety hazard or someone will get hurt or possibly even killed, then you want to vacate the area as soon as possible. And that's what the inspector is going to do. He's going to tell them, hey, this is not safe, and you guys need to somehow figure out how to make this safe. But until then, let's get away from this so that nobody gets hurt, okay? The adjudication order would need to be issued if that serious hazard isn't abated within, say, whatever amount of time it needs to be abated in. So the adjudication order most likely would tell the owner or the contractor to abate the condition immediately or within hours. And until then, that area of the building has to remain vacant. Okay, determination on compliance. So the building official would need to evaluate the inspector's report and render a final determination to be communicated in the form of adjudication order, or any additional approvals are necessary, and make the determination within 4 days of the inspector's reporting as required in sections 108, 6.2, and 6.3. This may not make a lot of sense to you right now. Inspectors, when you're in the inspection session tomorrow, we're going to go through this in great detail. But basically, if someone chooses not to respond with either, after an inspection is done, with either fixing it in the field to make it match or revising and resubmitting the construction documents for reapproval, then the building inspector needs to document the condition in a report. That inspection report, this is a separate thing. It's only with this one condition only. You're going to send it to the building official. The building official is going to evaluate it. If he agrees that it needs to be an adjudication order, he'll send it to the owner, and the owner then has to take steps to either abate it or go to appeals. And you oftentimes have, well, let me back up. So once you've given that report to the building official has 4 days to respond to the owner with this information, okay? All right, 109, adjudication orders, perfect place to roll right into that. All right, it is a legal instrument. An adjudication order is a legal instrument, and it's used to process the enforcing of rules when the proposed work is not in compliance. It could also be for the design. It communicates the non-compliance issue to the owner, including their right to appeal, as in how to access appeals, who to contact, how much money to pay to get on the hearing agenda, et cetera, et cetera. And the process must require actions to be taken to achieve compliance, okay, for safety and sanitation, and to protect Ohio citizens' rights due to the process being appeals and possibly accessing the courts. That's why an adjudication order needs to be written correctly. It has to have code section cited as rule, as an administrative rule, or even a higher revised code statute that is going to be enforced, and then additional information as to what the violation is, and that's what's going to go before the Board of Appeals. And it says, prior to taking any action, civil or criminal, building officials must first issue the adjudication order. So if you start taking punitive actions against the owner without having issued the adjudication order, that won't work out really well for you. All right, the parts of a valid adjudication order. You have to have the name and address of the owner, address of the property, where the project is, specific citations as I indicated, actions necessary to resolve the issue if known, description of the appeal procedure, and remember the owner has to be responsive. They have to reply within 30 days of the date of the mailing. Explanation that the owner may be represented by counsel and present arguments in writing or orally. Give a reasonable period of time to respond. Most time that's going to be 30 days. Building official may choose to give 60 days. It's really up to the building official to decide how long it takes for something to be complying with. Keep in mind that if the issue is a big issue and the owner receives an adjudication order and then they decide to go ahead and just abate the condition, it still might take more than 30 days to fix it. So that's why the building official really needs to evaluate this carefully and then put down what he thinks is a reasonable amount of time to get it to comply. Now, the 30-day clock's still going, though, when it comes to the expiration of the adjudication order in terms of allowing the owner the right to appeal, meaning accessing the board to get a hearing. And then there has to be an adjudication order number. Signature of the building official is always required. An order is sent to the owner and the representative. Okay, let's talk about unsafe buildings. How to determine and address building conditions that are dangerous to human life. That's what we're talking about. If the condition is unsafe or unsanitary due to risk, such as inadequate means of egress, inadequate light and ventilation, a fire hazard, or anything else that's otherwise dangerous, it is considered a serious hazard. The hazard must be eliminated, is what it boils down to. And if it can't be eliminated completely or in its entirety, the building area must be vacated so no one interacts with the condition. If after being vacated and the serious hazard is not abated, it could be declared either that area or the whole building could be considered a public nuisance, where your prosecutor or law director is going to go after the owner and take legal action against them to either fix it, or the end result could be that the building could be raised so as to protect the public. So if this is serious stuff. So the owner can respond to the order by either restoring the structure to a safe condition and must comply with the OBC Chapter 34 for repairs, especially in the case of existing buildings. And I'm sorry, this isn't completely accurate now. Another one of those catches. You'll be referring to the OEBC for the specifics that were previously in Chapter 34. The owner can also take this approach. When the serious hazard is not eliminated, The building official per 109.4.1 can seek an injunction process whereby any building which is declared to be a public nuisance may be enjoined in a proceeding instituted in the name of any department or officer in a court of common pleas. So as you can see, again, the end result could end up as a fight in court. So we want to make sure that all of this paperwork is done correctly, that all the legal parameters are established in these forms, and that it is known to the building official and to the owner the time limitations to address these issues. Okay, appeals, section 110. So there's a couple of different types of boards of appeals. There's local ones, and the local ones are certified by the Ohio Board of Building Standards. There is 7 primary ones, and then probably another handful or more of other local board of building appeals that are contracted with these larger ones. If you're in an area where there is a local board of appeals, meaning one that's certified by the board for commercial projects, okay? These LBBAs are only for commercial projects, not for residential. The residential appeals could be any entity that the jurisdiction chooses to set up. It could be a zoning board, it could be an architectural review board, it could be a legitimate residential building code board of appeals, or it's formally set up and that's the only thing that they hear. But whatever it is, excuse me, the residential ones are always at the local level, but not this type of local level. This is for commercial only, the ones that we certify, okay? So if a hearing's done and the owner's not satisfied with the outcome, he can now appeal, and instead of going to the courts, he can come back to the State Board of Appeals to get what is called a de novo hearing. It's another hearing, just like the first one, but it's done brand new from the start. The Board of Building Appeals here at the state would basically objectively start at the beginning, hear the whole thing over again, and not try to take into consideration what the previous decision was, and make either a new determination or stay in agreement with what the local Board of Appeals had determined. Okay. Once that de novo is done, if they didn't prevail there at the State Board of Appeals, they can still access the Court of Common Pleas or wherever the court is in the jurisdiction where the project is located. So the State Board of Appeals, for all of you that don't have a local, you're going to the state. And you either come to Columbus or you go to Ashland twice a month. It's established per the Ohio Revised Code. It conducts hearings for political subdivisions that do not have the local boards of appeals. And again, they can further the appeals to the courts, even from the State Board of Appeals. So again, all legal. So here's what they do. This is their powers, their authority. They hear and decide adjudication orders issued by the local board building official, and they can reverse or modify the adjudication order if the order is contrary to such laws or rules, or if it's contrary to a fair interpretation or an application thereof. If a variance from the provisions of the laws or rules is in a specific case, it will not be contrary to the public interest. Where literal enforcement of such provisions will result in unnecessary hardship. So how do they do it? They conduct the hearings at the local level, and then that board needs to render a decision within 30 days after the hearing, and they must issue the well, it may not be certified anymore. Is that true or not, Meg? You there, Meg? Okay.
Yeah, I'm here.
I can't remember
It's
if they're
good.
still required to do certified.
They do need to do a certified copy, but I think that there's an electronic way that they're doing certified copies at this
Okay.
point. It does not need to be issued by certified mail with a physical return receipt of the green card.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So ignore that bit right there, but basically the decision has to be published and issued to the owner and to all the other parties. And then must mail the copy to the attorney or the representative. Remember, the owner can choose to have representation to be the person that actually deliberates the cause and provides information to the board. All right, so adjudication appeal hearings, if the appeals concern accessibility, again, reasonable notice has to be given to local organizations representing the disabled and any statewide organizations representing the disabled if there is no local organization. And the reason why this is this way is because the advocates generally know way more and understand the legal ins and outs of deliberating an appeal with regards to accessibility before a Board of Building Appeals. So there has to be a notice sent to these organizations on behalf of the owner or the person that's asking for the appeal. And then this notice must include the time, date, place, and subject of the hearing. And then the appeal a decision of a certified local building appeals. Any party to the adjudication hearing may appeal, any party. Further appeals can be made to the Ohio Board of Building Appeals within 30 days of their decision, which is the de novo hearing. And then if necessary, the Court of Common Pleas is accessed in the county of the appellant or in which the project is located. Okay. Jay, you're up.
Shifting gears. Get the right window shared. Yep, there we go. Hopefully everybody can see that. Sharing Chapter 1, Section 111, Certificates of Occupancy and Completion. So we started off in 105 with an approval being required, and that starts with an application and submittal of construction documents. This is the section that kind of closes that loop. This is the part that says that the building owner has done what they're supposed to do to construct a safe and sanitary building, and the building department, building official is affirming that with a certificate of occupancy that allows the owner to now occupy the building and once again closes that loop. So it starts in 111.1 where no building or structure in whole or in part shall be used or occupied until that building official issues the certificate of occupancy or certificate of completion. And we'll get into the difference between those two in a little bit. So a certificate of occupancy basically says that it's issued to the building and that the building can be used only in compliance with the certificate of occupancy. So there's going to be information on that certificate of occupancy that says what it's been approved for, the use, the number of occupants, that kind of stuff, and that there is a requirement that the owner has to maintain that building in accordance with this approval. And essentially what happens is if they continue to maintain it, that certificate of occupancy stays valid, and the owner can continue to use that building past the next code cycle, and so on into perpetuity, until the owner wants to make a change. And then we go back to that original drawing. If the owner needs to or wants to make a change, they go back through the building department and that approval process for relative to that change. So when the building is entitled to a certificate of occupancy, the building official shall issue that certificate of occupancy. They can't hold on to that certificate of occupancy pending the zoning department review and approval, or pending an engineering department approval, or any of those other local ordinances. If the building has been constructed in accordance with its approval and all the inspections are satisfactory, then the building official shall issue a certificate of occupancy because that building is entitled to that. The building official also needs to send a copy of that certificate of occupancy to the local fire official. The fire official needs that information because they might be conducting annual inspections. They need to know what the conditions of the approval are, what the approved uses of the building are. They'll verify that stuff. So in the ongoing fire prevention end, that's where some of the changes that owners make are oftentimes caught because the fire officials are out there noticing that, hey, this isn't being used in accordance with its approval. And the owner has an obligation to get that corrected. So much like approvals, there are a number of types of certificates of occupancies that can be issued. And a lot of them are covered under the same thing, but like new buildings and structures and additions, you'll find some information about that in section 111.1.1.1. It's fairly straightforward. It's what we've been talking about this whole time. If it was construction documents are approved, construction documents or buildings are constructed in accordance with those approved documents, inspections verify that, certificate of occupancy is issued for the new building or the addition. A change in occupancy is that notes where an owner is using the building differently than what it was originally approved for, that use group is changed, or the number of occupants that building can accommodate has gone up. It can always go, like the number of occupants can always go down, and that's a change in the level of activity, but it's within the maximum amount that the building was approved from an occupant load standpoint. So you can always go down, but if they want to put more occupants in the building, that's a change in occupancy, and the risks go up. Application of code provisions are different, so they do need to get a change of occupancy for more occupants, as an example. Partial occupancy. Now here's one where we used this in a hospital project that I worked on, where there were 2 floors and there were 4 suites, 2 suites on each floor, and we had to rotate patients around and work in limited areas of the building, and it had a common fire automatic sprinkler system. So we had to support with equivalent fire protection features in areas that were getting where the renovations had been done. They got a partial occupancy to go back into that area while they were working on the next area. So there were conditions associated with the partial occupancy certificate, but it allowed them to use those renovated areas. And then, of course, once all of the floors and all of the suites got complete, they get a certificate of occupancy for, in this case, it was a change of occupancy. There's also a time limited occupancy. This is where an owner has a building. My common example is they have a nice big house on a very prestigious golf course, and that they want to use it for assembly space to entertain folks over a particular golf tournament. And it's approved as a residential building. It's not approved as an assembly occupancy. They can work with the building department, the fire official, and they can work through a time limited certificate of occupancy that says from Thursday to next Tuesday, you can increase the occupant load. You can use it as an assembly space. You're going to do these list of things to assure the safety of the occupants, but you then lawfully can occupy this as a place of assembly. then once that time limited occupancy date has expired, then the building reverts back to its previous approval as a residential building. We also have certificates of occupancy for temporary structures. Time limited occupancies and temporary structures are two totally different approvals. A temporary structure is a structure that is going to be erected for 180 days or less, and then it goes away. Time limited occupancy is the building is there, it's permanent, it was one occupancy yesterday, it's this occupancy today, and it goes back to that previous occupancy tomorrow. So those are the two different differences there, and they're not interchangeable. So certificate of completion 111.1.1, this has been specifically generated to work with existing buildings for alterations and repairs where the occupancy really isn't changing. They're not really losing occupancy. They're not making a change to the occupancy classification. So what this one, and oftentimes the owners will continue, much like in my hospital example, the owners will continue to use the building while that work is going on. So it was a little bit difficult for people to understand why a whole new certificate of occupancy is issued when all we really want is a closure of the loop. There's alterations require an approval, so they get that approval, they have to do that construction, but it doesn't really change the occupancy. They could always occupy the building. We just need a way to close that approval loop, so we have the certificate of completion, and it's limited to working with alterations and repairs in existing buildings. And if an owner does want to continue to occupy spaces within the building that are being worked on under the approval, the building official needs to determine that those existing spaces can be occupied safely. So back to my example, there were some conditions on the owner that he had to provide some additional fire extinguishers. They had to have a fire watch. There was a couple other, I'm not recalling them now, to safely occupy that space while we were going through the partial occupancies. This is not dissimilar to that.
I'm familiar with them, yeah.
So we got somebody's mics on. Thank you. So certificates being issued. So 111.2 that the certificate of occupancy that is issued allows the building owner, as I've said before, to use the building for its proposed use and its parts. And there are 12 specific items that need to be included in their certificate of occupancy. An important thing to note, here's the list of the 12. Obviously, it needs to be tied to a plan approval application number, so you know which approval this is closing the loop on. It gives the address of the building, but it doesn't identify the owner or the tenant, because the certificate of occupancy or completion goes with the building. We don't really have necessarily an interest in who owns the building or who's in the building, as long as they're using the building as it's indicated on the certificate of occupancy. So it's tied to the address, it's tied to the approval, but one owner could sell it to another owner and it doesn't invalidate that certificate of occupancy. They don't have to get a new one just because the owner changed. There needs to be, again, a description of the portion of the structure for which the certificate is issued. This becomes more important as alterations take place, additions take place, things like that. Signature of the building official. This is one of those things that the building official has the authority to do and must do. Can't dedicate that or delegate that to someone else. The addition of the code under which that plan approval was issued, the use and occupancy in accordance with Chapter 3, the type of construction in accordance with Chapter 6, the occupant load. Those things are all things that go into the determination as to whether or not there is in the future a change of occupancy and an increase in the level of activities or an increase in the risks to the occupants. Whether or not it has an automatic sprinkler system, and that if there is hazardous classification or hazardous materials, that stuff needs to be noted. The standpipe demand at the base of the riser. These are all things that in these last ones are things that get checked on by the fire official during those annual inspections. And the owner is responsible to maintain these conditions. And of course, the 12th one, the catch-all, if there's any special stipulations or conditions that came through with the plan approval, including if they appealed something and they were issued a variance or relief from a specific code requirement, that should be included in the certificate of occupancy or completion. The forms are very similar, and here's an example of one.
Jay?
Yeah.
There's a question in the chat that I think is really interesting, asking whether the owner's name could be included on the certificate of occupancy, because the daycare licensing board does require that the daycare's name be on the certificate of occupancy.
So I would put that in the category of that's more information that's required, and there's nothing that prohibits more information from going on. But I would also caution that it has no impact on the validation of that certificate of occupancy or the validity of that certificate of occupancy. If that child care owner moves out and another one moves in, it's still a valid certificate of occupancy from the Board of Building Standards and in compliance with the rules of the board.
Yeah,
Thank
that's a
you.
good point. Also, we don't want to allow the CO become basically a tenancy report card. So a building is as built is safe, and as long as it's being used the way it was originally approved, we don't care who's in it, what their name is. It's still valid and it still can be occupied safely.
Yep. So the certificate of occupancy is valid if it's used as approved and that the building is being maintained and tested in accordance with that approval. So 111.4 is existing buildings. We've talked a little bit about existing buildings and that there's a lot of times when an owner needs a certificate of occupancy but doesn't have a certificate of occupancy. We have buildings in the state of Ohio that were built before the building code and they're still occupied. We have buildings that for whatever reason the record has been lost. But if there is an existing building and an owner makes a written request, the building official can issue a certificate of occupancy for an existing building, provided there's no violations or pending orders out there in the building, and that is established after the building official does an inspection and an investigation and that the alleged occupancy of the building has previously existed. So this is not to say that a building owner can come in and request a certificate of occupancy for an existing building if one already exists and they want to like use it as a change of occupancy. This is where there isn't a record of an existing building. They can come and request that one be produced. The building official has to go through an inspection and an investigation process. the more information that the building owner can provide that supports the fact that that occupancy that they want existed and existed for how long, and that there's no record of persons being harmed or as a result of being in the building, and the building's ability to provide safe safe and sanitary space. This one does not mean that there might be non-compliant conditions in the building. It doesn't have to comply with all of the current provisions in the building code, but it fits in that category of, if it had an approval and had a certificate of occupancy, it's an existing building, it has been being occupied for a while and has no serious hazards, has no outstanding orders, it's allowed to continue to exist without change. So that's kind of the litmus test here. Does it have any serious hazards? Does it have any pending orders? And if you can demonstrate that that occupancy has existed in there for some period of time, then it is entitled to a certificate of occupancy for an existing building for that alleged occupancy. I kind of went through this, that we don't require change, removal, alteration, or abandonment, or prevent the continued use of that, unless, of course, it endangers public safety and welfare. That leads to, that's the serious hazard piece. Chapter or section 112, this is changes to the code. This just points out that there is a code change process, and that the board may act on its own motion to make changes to the board. Anyone can submit a code change petition to the board. Rule changes may include adopting new, that like we just did, amending an existing rule, which is something we've done recently with the RCO, the Residential Code of Ohio. We amended some rules. We can annul a rule, and we can rescind an existing rule. So what happens, like this last code cycle, we rescinded all of the existing rules that made up the 2017 Ohio Building Code, and the board on its own action adopted new, the 2024 Ohio Building Code. The rules in effect on the, and this is another thing that's important right now. Since we're going through a rule change, we're going to have some buildings that are being reviewed for approval and inspected against those approved documents that are under the 2017 Ohio Building Code. And as of March 1st, any new applications that come in for work has to comply with the 2024 Ohio Building Code. So it's the date on the application for plan approval that determines which rule is used, which set of rules, the 2017 or the 2024 OBC, are in effect for code compliance. And that date switch was last Friday, March 1, 2024. Quick little primer on industrialized units. If for those people that were familiar with the last edition, section 113 was industrialized units. We have taken those rules out. We are incorporating them into Ohio Administrative Code section 4101:10. Those rules are currently in development. Until they get completed, we will essentially be following the same rules in 113 that we've had, and we'll be doing that by policy. Most of this is going to impact our work with manufacturers, but so you know, as building code officials, a couple of definitions first, so that you have an idea what an industrialized unit is. So it is manufactured at a location remote from the site, and it includes some amount of closed construction, and it is transported to the building site for its subsequent use. So it's made over there, it's inspected over there, it's travels down the road and gets incorporated into a building at the site of intended use. There's oftentimes a lot of questions about closed construction, so there is a definition about closed construction, and this is really where you have a manufactured assembly, so that thing that's built off-site, and that there's materials, components, or systems that are concealed. So as it gets built, stuff gets concealed so that when it's transported, that stuff is concealed, and that stuff's not readily accessible for inspection at the site of intended use. So the building officials with and the building inspectors at the local uh, building department and the local jurisdiction can't see like the rough framing or the rough plumbing work that goes in the walls, the electrical system. Conductors are pulled, and so conduits in, boxes are in, conductors are pulled, grounding is placed, bonding is placed, devices are terminated, conductors are terminated, panels, faceplates are put on. We look at that as closed construction because you can't verify conductor size, grounding, bonding without uh, disassembling, damaging, or destroying that industrialized unit. And in that case, you would need to at least disassemble the faceplates and maybe pull out devices to verify some of those conditions. So closed construction. That essentially triggers the manufacturer's ability to work through the Board of Building Standards industrialized program to get approval for that stuff that's built off-site. But the building department does have authority, and there is references made in 105, 106, 102, and 1072 relative to if the owner has a responsibility to notify the building department that they are making use of industrialized units, that needs to be shown in the construction documents. That the building department does need to receive a copy of the the approved industrialized unit construction documents before that unit arrives at the site, so that the local building department knows sort of the scope of it and what they're going to need to inspect. 108.2.13 has the 4 areas of inspection that you're required to do. You need to look that it has a valid BBS IU insignia, so that's going to be a little sticker on each one of the modules. You need to look for any damage to the IU as a result of shipping or improper protections, and that's going to be fairly obvious. And what we found is that while the building inspectors notice it, by the time it gets reported back to us, the manufacturer is already working out the resolution to the problem. You also need to confirm that the general layout is in accordance with the approved documents. This is less critical with the Ohio Building Code and commercial structures. This happens is more of an issue with residential buildings, 1, 2, and 3 families. So we had a 1 family that came out, and the layout was completely flipped around from what the building owner had ordered and had delivered, and what was on the approved construction documents. And then the other thing is on-site details. So that industrialized unit is a part of a building. It comes in and it gets incorporated into a building. So there's connections at the site that need to be inspected. And then, of course, if you do find things that are non-compliant based on these 4 areas, there's responsibility to notify the building official, notify us down here at the industrialized unit program, and then we'll work with the building official to determine whatever corrective action. And that corrective action is always the responsibility of the manufacturer.
We are running up at the end of our time here. So Rob, how quick can you do 114?
Do it as quickly as possible, and I'll cut it off at appropriate time.
Well, our time is ending 5 minutes ago.
Oh, I did? Okay.
Yeah,
Well, I'll just do a quick two-slider. How's that?
fabulous.
All right. So what we have here in section 114 and 115, the quick thing about 115 is it was about the board organization. All that's going to be moved to organizational rules that'll be eventually posted on the board's website. So it's no longer part of chapter 1. Chapter 114 deals with the approval of products and materials. And what it is basically saying that any material, product, assembly, or method of construction used in a building or structure shall be approved by the building official. The provisions that are in this section help the building official establish conformity. So there's a couple of quick definitions I want to give you. There's conformity assessment bodies, which in essence is all the agencies that will be providing reports and things of that nature to the building official for their review. They are accredited by a larger group, actually a smaller group, but a worldwide group of accreditation bodies that verify their technical competence as conformity assessment bodies. Conformity assessment bodies are things like testing laboratories, evaluation service agencies, special inspection agencies, things of that nature. And they do have to be recognized by our board. Just a quick organizational chart of what that looks like, and this is where we're going to end it. The Board of Building Standards grants recognition to all of these agencies. We've contacted every one of, there's, I don't know, probably a couple hundred of them. They're all organized by the type of conformity assessment that they do, meaning evaluation of products and materials and methods of construction. So testing labs, product certification bodies, which are listing agencies, and evaluation services, okay? Inspection bodies, field evaluation bodies, fabricator inspection agencies, special inspection agencies, and calibration labs, meaning labs that check the instrumentation of all these other types of agencies so that there is accuracy in the testing. And then the last thing that we evaluate, though we don't necessarily regulate, is an industry trade association. These are basically certification programs that are in plants that are basically mass producing products, and they have their own basically quality assurance system in-house to make sure that things are going to be correct. Just as a quick aside, everything is regulated by these types of agencies. I lifted up my keyboard, and on the back of it has a UL sticker. So Underwriter Laboratories is probably one of the biggest players in this business, but basically they're assuring that any product, material in particular is going to be safe for use. And that's what this whole thing is about. Whenever there's anything that is going to be incorporated into a project, it's going to be sent to the building official for review and approval. And that's all I got.
All right, Rob, Jay, thank you so much. Great presentation today. Thank you all for your good questions and your engagement in this subject. We're going to go ahead and end the recording, and you have about 5 minutes before you need to be in Code Archaeology to, grab a drink, use facilities, whatever. We will see you at 3 o'clock in Code Archaeology. If you need the link, I have added it to the chat and pinned it there so that you can click on the link and go to your next meeting. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.